It's an honor to be with you today, and a particular honor to be the chairman of the House AI Task Force. And as is mentioned, it's kind of a unique experience for me. I feel like my life has kind of come full circle because my ambition in life was never to be in politics. It was to be a researcher in artificial intelligence. My father, when I was in fifth grade, brought me an Apple II computer and gave me a book on how to teach yourself programming in BASIC. And that kindled in me a lifelong learning for computer science and particularly artificial intelligence. And so I thought to myself, AI is going to change the world and I want to be a part of that. And so I went to school, went to Caltech, got a degree in computer engineering. And then I was working on my doctorate in artificial intelligence at UCLA, doing some of the very early research in natural language processing and computer vision when my side hustle at the time, which I only did to make money to put myself through grad school, was writing video game software. My side hustle took off. One of my video games was a hit, and that deflected me out of a career in academia into a career in business. And so I spent 30 years running a video game development studio. So as a small business owner, I experienced many of the same pressures and economic uncertainties that you do every day. It gave me a really unique perspective on those. So it's kind of deeply ironic for me to now find myself in Congress and find myself leading the effort on the regulation of AI. But I wanted to spend a few minutes this morning talking about what we think our approach to AI regulation is going to be, with a particular emphasis on healthcare. And I have a very unique perspective on this as well, because in addition to being the chair of the AI task force, I sit on the health subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee. So as you know, that's where all of the regulation is housed and the oversight over programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and the federal response to healthcare and its regulation. And I also sit on the House Budget Committee. We're going to leave some time for Q&A at the end. I can answer anything that you want to know about the House's approach to AI, but also what's going on in Washington with H.R. 1 and the reconciliation bill and Medicaid. Don't throw anything at me, but if you have a question about that, I'm happy to take that at the end too. So we have been kind of, for the last year and a half, grappling with this issue of AI regulation in the United States. And it comes at a unique time on the world stage because there are other areas of the world that are way ahead of the United States in deciding how they are going to approach the regulation of AI. And particularly the EU has attempted to take a lead here, and they passed over a year ago something they call the EU AI Act, which establishes a very comprehensive framework for the regulation of AI. So 2 years ago, the speaker asked me to form a working group on AI to start exploring what our regulatory approach was going to be. And then last year, the speaker asked me to form a task force on artificial intelligence. And our stated goal was, by the end of the year, to deliver a report proposing a concrete regulatory framework for AI in the United States. So no pressure, right? Uh, a couple of things that I asked the speaker to do when we formed the task force. Thing number one, I said, let's just admit from the start that we live in a unique era of partisan politics in the United States. And I don't have to tell anyone in this room how the partisanism has driven divisions in our communities and our government. Makes it very hard to get things done in Washington. But the number one thing that we need to achieve, in my opinion, when we craft the rules governing the use of AI in the United States, is we need it to be durable. We can't be changing the rules governing the use of AI every time the winds of political fortune shift one way or the other. And to be durable, that means it has to be bipartisan. So I asked the speaker, look, let's not do what the party in power usually does in the House of Representatives, because we're a majoritarian institution. Let's not put more Republican seats on the task force than Democrat seats so that we have a voting advantage. Let's admit from the onset that what we create has to be bipartisan. And so please, let's have an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. And he said, okay, be careful what you wish for, but that's what he did. I also said, don't send me a bunch of technologists. I said, I don't want a bunch of people who already know about this technology. I want members of Congress from all different walks of life. And in particular, I want them from all different policy committees to bring their experience and perspectives to our task force so that we can learn from them. And equally importantly, I want to surface any opposition early so that we can fix it in the task force and then create a product that everyone can go back to their committees of jurisdiction and evangelize. And again, he said, be careful what you wish for, but that's what I got. I got a wide variety of different members. And we spent all of last year in crafting this report. We had 25 hearings. We explored a wide variety of different policy topics, and we delivered in December a report that was over 270 pages long. I would encourage you, if you would like, just Google House AI Task Force report, and we'll take you to a digital copy of that. I would recommend at least reading the executive summary when over here. Please don't read while I'm talking, later today, if you want some bedside reading material, just take a look at the executive summary. We tried to do a thoughtful job in kind of summarizing everything that you can just read in a couple of minutes. But I'll give you a brief overview here as we're talking. But the task force report contains over 60 key findings and 85 policy recommendations. And those policy recommendations are not worded as vague, broad policy initiatives. They are very concrete, very specific policy initiatives, and we intend this to be a to-do list for future Congresses, starting with the one that we're in right now. We think that if we implemented all 85 of those recommendations, that we would enact a comprehensive regulatory framework that would be appropriate for the United States. And let me tell you, the number one goal that we had when we set out to write the report was we wanted to balance two competing interests. On the one hand, I don't have to tell you what a transformative effect AI is going to have on all different aspects of our economy and our society. It is going to be massively disruptive, as technological revolutions always are. We want to make sure that Americans are protected against the malicious use of AI and the results of some of those disruptions. So that was one of our stated goals. The other goal, though, is to make sure we set a regulatory framework that allows AI to thrive in the United States, because we think that AI is going to be the single most powerful tool for the enhancement of human productivity that mankind has ever come up with. And we want to make sure that we lay the framework for allowing that to occur in the United States, along with all the concomitant positive benefits that's going to bring. So those two ideas are kind of in tension, right? If you go too far on the protectionism, then you're going to stifle innovation. If you allow AI to just run free, you're going to sacrifice the protection. So we need to achieve a balance between those two goals. So how do we do that? Do we follow the lead of Europe? And that was the number one thing we considered. And the answer we came up with, it was absolutely not. What the EU has done is created a very centralized bureaucracy for the regulation of AI. So they have their existing sectoral regulators, but they're spinning up a brand new regulator just for the purpose of AI regulation. And if you use AI in any sector of the European economy, you will shortly be required to get another license for the use of that AI from this regulator. The other thing that they did, which we thought was really destructive, is they delegated the regulation of AI to that regulator. So they said, basically, we're going to spin up the regulator, we're going to empower you, but we're not going to tell you what to do. Instead, we're going to ask you to write a code of conduct and a code of practice, which they're about to come up with their first draft here, I think just in another month or two. And that will govern the use of AI in the European Union. And we think that that's very unhealthy. We think that we are elected for a reason. We think that we need to be specific when we tell our regulators how to regulate, and we think that we abdicate our responsibility as lawmakers if we spin up a bureaucracy and just say, okay, go regulate, and don't tell them how. Another thing that we disagree with about the way the EU has approached the job is that in this country, we believe in regulating outcomes, not regulating tools. And the EU is regulating the tool. AI is a very powerful tool, but it is, at the end of the day, just a tool. It is a means to an end. And the EU is regulating it as a tool instead of focusing on the outcomes. And in the United States, we have had a lot of success in focusing on outcomes. And I'll give you one specific example. We don't need to pass a new law to say that AI cannot be used to steal people's money, right? It is already illegal to steal people's money in a lot of different ways. AI is being used for that, unfortunately, and extremely effectively. And you'll see in the next few months, unfortunately, that continue to accelerate. So we need to make sure that our law enforcement agencies have the tool and resources they need to police the use of AI to steal people's money. But Congress does not need to make a new rule that says you can't use AI to steal people's money. Let me give you a little bit more subtle example. There was a well-publicized incident a couple of years ago where an experimental AI algorithm was created for the automated screening of resumes. So in other words, you have a job opening, you advertise this, you get 1,000 resumes, and you want to winnow that down to the 25 people that you're actually going to call and do a phone screening with. And there was a lot of interest in having an AI algorithm that would do that in an automated way. Uh, Unfortunately, that algorithm ended up exhibiting some very troubling biases, in particular racial biases. Uh, and in retrospect, they should have known better. I mean, now with the benefit of hindsight, we can say uh, the screening of resumes is something that we now would call a highly consequential decision-making process. In other words, the decision that you are making has really extreme consequences for the people that you're making it about. Whether or not this resume gets through the sieve and you get a phone call to screen you, that's very consequential. And so now we would look at it and say that deserves some extra scrutiny. We also now know a lot more about the way that biases creep into these algorithms based on the training data. And that's what happened in this case. They fed a bunch of training data of people that were successful that were white, and the algorithm sussed out the fact that they were white and used that to help screen the resumes. And so we now know it was, how to prevent that. So it was great that that was unintentional. It was wonderful that it got caught. And it was great that it taught us a lot about how not to do training and what algorithm usage deserves some extra scrutiny. But none of that should distract from the fact that had that algorithm been deployed, it still would have been illegal to use it the moment those biases were identified, because it is illegal to use racial bias in hiring decisions. And it doesn't matter if you use AI to do that or not. So there was a lot of angst about that, about, pointing at that, oh, look, we've got to worry about it, bias in AI. We do have to worry about bias. We have to worry about it in AI and other places as well. But we don't need new laws that say you have to check for bias in AI, because you have to check for bias anytime you're making highly consequential decisions. So this kind of frames our worldview when we look at the situation in the United States. Another misconception that a lot of people have is that because Congress has been slow to act on AI regulation, and undeniably we have been, that AI is largely unregulated in the United States. And that is absolutely false. So we believe in sectoral regulation in the United States, and that's kind of our approach to regulation. And we have sectoral regulators that are already having to deal with the regulation of AI within their spaces. And one that you're, I'm sure, quite familiar with is the FDA. It might shock you to hear me say that the FDA has already issued over 1,000 permits for the use of AI in medical devices. Think about that. Already over 1,000 permits for the use of AI in medical devices. Hundreds of those devices are already on shelves. And the thing that I find astonishing about that is that when you look at the risks of AI, and we did a lot of thinking about this, and there's a report on this that was done by NIST about 18 months ago that's actually now considered probably the most forward-thinking document on evaluating the risks of AI deployment that's been done anywhere in the world. Many other countries have adopted it. It's the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. If you go through that, what it boils down to is that the risks of AI deployment are highly contextual. In other words, it matters very much what you intend to do with the AI when you're evaluating what the risks are in deploying it, and consequently you're evaluating how to regulate it. You need to consider how it's being deployed to figure out what those risks are. Well, if you think about the use of AI in a medical device, it's hard to imagine a more consequential usage, right? Something that's going to be implanted in someone's body, or something that's part of a diagnostic tool that's being used to make life-altering medical decisions about someone. Those are really consequential usages, and therefore the risks are already high. And yet the FDA is already navigating this space. And by the way, according to the stakeholders that we talked to across the stakeholder spectrum, pretty successfully. They're doing a very solid job of doing that. So what we are recommending in the framework is a sectoral approach to regulation that takes that, we call it the hub and spoke approach. So the spokes are our sectoral regulators that takes the existing approach to regulation, uh, accepts the fact that our sectoral regulators are going to know the most about the risks of deployment in their sectors and empowers them with the resources and tools that they need to do their jobs. And then we'll also need a hub for that. So we'll need some kind of federal organization or agency that houses tools and resources to empower those sectoral regulators. So they will need a bunch of things. They will need a deep pool of technical talent. They will need a bunch of testing and evaluation methodologies. In other words, a regulatory toolkit that we can hand all of our sectoral regulators that they can pick, what methodologies and tests are appropriate for the job of regulating that they need to do so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They're going to need regulatory sandboxes for the testing of potentially malicious AI. They're going to need all of those things to be able to do their jobs. So that is the gist of what we're recommending in the report. And think about the contrast between that and what the EU is doing. So basically what we're saying is it makes a lot more sense that the FDA should be empowered to regulate the use of AI in medical devices because the FDA has spent decades learning about how to ensure patient safety. It would be a lot easier to teach the FDA what it might not already know about AI than it would be to teach a brand new entity everything the FDA knows about ensuring patient safety. And that's what the EU is attempting to do in essence. Because how can you come up with rules for regulating the use of AI in medical devices if you don't know what the FDA knows? And that's true in a lot of different sectoral spaces. The FAA is already grappling with the regulation of AI for the use in aircraft avionics. NHTSA is already regulating the use of AI in autonomously driven vehicles, and the list goes on and on and on. So that's the regulatory framework that we are recommending. And then we have other chapters in the report that deal with other issues in the AI space. For example, we have a whole chapter on workforce and education issues in which we talk about the disruption that this is going to cause in our workforce. We talk about, first of all, the need to prepare our young people for careers in an AI-powered workspace. We think that job starts in elementary school, and we fear that if we don't do the job of equipping our young people with those skills, that it's going to exacerbate the division between people who know how to use AI to make themselves more productive and people who don't have that information. And we think that would be very destructive. So we think we need to focus on that. We also need to be prepared for reskilling. We're going to have people that get displaced, that have their job automated away. And we need to be prepared for that. We need to make sure that we reskill them in ways that allow them to use AI to go be successful doing something else. And we are going to have people that slip through the cracks. So we need to make sure that our social safety nets are beefed up to make sure we handle the people who do slip through the cracks. While we're on this topic, though, and just because I have the time, and normally I don't have this long, so it's wonderful to be able to kind of go into the weeds on this. Let me talk about something about displacement, because there's a lot of angst about displacement, and it has colored people's worldview in a negative way about AI. Because the mantra is AI is going to take everyone's jobs away. Right? Raise your hand if you heard that. AI is going to take your job away, and here's my challenge to that. AI has always been disruptive, all the way back to the invention of the printing press. Most recently, it's been the internet. But before that, we had the Industrial Revolution. And you remember the anecdotal story of the Luddites that burned the textile looms in pre-industrial revolutionary England because they feared that those automated looms were going to take their jobs away. And you know what? They were absolutely right. Those automated looms did take their jobs away. However, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the advent of machine weaving meant that for the first time, high-quality cloth garments were available to middle-class people. That was the first time in human history that happened. Before then, you could tell the difference between someone that was lower class, middle class, and upper class just by looking at what they were wearing, because if you were middle class, you couldn't afford high-quality cloth garments. They were very expensive because they were so labor-intensive. You wore homespun. So for the first time there, from then on, we've all been able to afford high-quality cloth garments. Okay, so that's something that you wouldn't give up to save some textile jobs. And the same is true in a lot of different things that technology has disrupted. So we can't imagine the jobs that are going to be created by AI. And let me give you another example. So every year, a survey is done on the number one job that high school seniors aspire to. So when I was growing up, the number one job in that survey was astronaut. Right? It was the end of the Apollo space program. Everyone wanted to be an astronaut, although I wanted to be an astronaut, although very few of us actually accomplished that. It drove a whole generation of Americans into STEM fields, and we have been reaping the benefits of that ever since. So can you guess what last year the number one job that high school seniors aspire to in the United States was? Computer science, I heard. I wish that was true. Unfortunately not. I heard a yes. Social media influencer. So ignoring for a moment the somewhat disturbing things that says about our society, think about this. How would you articulate to someone before the advent of the internet what a social media influencer is and what they do that is beneficial to society and worth paying people money for? How would you even have that conversation? You couldn't, right? You wouldn't have like the social currency to be even able to articulate that. So the same is going to be true of AI. AI is going to displace jobs, but it is going to create, I believe, more jobs for humans than it displaces. I'll give you another example from my own home state of California. So last year we had a very contentious labor strike with the Hollywood scriptwriters. Did you hear about this? And it was finally resolved after months and months of conflict. And one of the central issues in that strike was the use of AI for the automated creation of movie scripts. And the script writers said, we want you movie studios to not be allowed to do that because, the implication is we fear that's going to result in fewer jobs for script writers. And I thought, how short-sighted. Because we're looking at the world through a pre-AI lens. I see a world 20 years from now where when I go on Netflix, I don't see a show that is created once for everyone to watch. I can watch a show that's created by generative AI just for me in real time based on what I want to watch right now and my viewing preferences in the past. And that is going to result in way more jobs for scriptwriters, human scriptwriters. I mean, yes, it will be scriptwriters that know how to use AI to make themselves more productive, but still many more jobs for human scriptwriters as a result of that. And that's just one example. So I am an AI optimist. I think that AI is going to be a tool that not only unlocks human potential, human creativity, and human productivity, but I think it's going to create a rising wave of prosperity that literally lifts all the boats in America. And that is the promise of AI if we do our jobs as regulators right. So now we are transitioning from planning phase, which is the creation of the report, into the implementation phase. And I know people are skeptical of Congress, and I acknowledge your skepticism. I'm skeptical myself too. There's sometimes, my wife will tell you in the back, sometimes I get up in the morning and I say, why am I doing this job? Actually, this is a bad week to ask. We just had a very tumultuous couple of weeks in the House. But let me give you some reason for optimism that we can actually follow through and implement that framework. Our charter as a task force required us to get our report approved by not only the speaker and his staff, but also by the minority leader and his staff. And we actually went beyond that. We got unanimous approval from our report from all 24 members of our task force, 12 Republicans and 12 Democrats. And the way we did that is not only did we try and surface all of the conflict early, we went into it with an acknowledgement that it had to be bipartisan. And you should see what was left on the cutting room floor, because that 270 pages, those 85 policy recommendations, those are the things that everyone could agree on. And if something was contentious, we said, you know what, okay, we'll work on that later. But there was still enough left to form a fully fleshed out regulatory framework. And that gives me some optimism that Congress is actually capable of acting on this issue. But we have a challenge. And the challenge is that the states are getting ahead of us on the regulation of AI. So there are currently, just this calendar year, just since the 1st of January, there are currently over 1,000 bills on the topic of AI regulation pending in state legislatures across the country. And that's just this year. A year and a half ago, there was a bill passed in Colorado that was a very far-reaching bill on the topic of AI regulation. And the governor of Colorado, Governor Paulus, actually said in his signing message, I don't think the states ought to be doing this. I think this is interstate commerce. I think that Article 1 of the Constitution empowers Congress to regulate interstate commerce, not the states. But because Congress has not stepped in to regulate, and because I think that there are real risks that need to be mitigated, and because I have no faith that Congress is going to get around to doing this, and as a former member, he should know, I am going to sign this with a delayed implementation date, and that date is February of next year. And that's a very far-reaching bill. We had a bill introduced in my home state of California last year that would have gone even further. It would have been, in my opinion, very destructive to and disruptive to innovation. Fortunately, that bill passed out of both chambers of the legislature, but Governor Newsom vetoed it last fall. But the author has reintroduced it a month ago and is confident the governor will sign it this year, and I probably agree with him. So the problem is, because the states are out there regulating, we risk getting into a situation where we have 50 different approaches to the regulation of AI passed by the 50 different states that go in 50 wildly different directions. And we have been through this before. Digital data privacy is a hot mess, as you probably know, because of the jobs that you do in this room. This is something that Congress never got around to establishing a single federal framework for data privacy. And because of that, all the states have gone their different directions. And I know a lot about this. When I was in the state legislature in California, I was the Republican lead for the passage of the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. So that was a whole year of my life that we went through. And I can tell you, as a technology entrepreneur, it is incredibly destructive to entrepreneurialism and innovation to have to comply with 50 different standards. The people that have the sophistication to deal with a regulatory landscape that complicated are the Googles and the Apples of the world that have buildings full of lawyers. The people that cannot navigate 50 different state standards are two people in a garage trying to start the next Google. And this is the problem that we're facing with AI, because the destructive impact on the deployment of AI and innovation in AI in the United States will be 10 times worse for AI than it was for digital data privacy. And by the way, we have been trying for the last 3 years now to craft a unified federal standard for data privacy. And guess what the number one, and I'm on that working group, guess what the number one impediment to doing that is? The states. Because they feel creative ownership of what they've created, and they don't want us to take their regulatory authorities away. And so that has been the number one problem, is trying to come up with something that not only satisfies the parochial interests of all of our members, but also has the states agreeing that this is a good thing. So I fear that we have a limited amount of runway to get regulation done at the federal level on AI, because if we let the states get ahead of us, then it's going to be very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. So when I tell this story to my colleagues, I phrase it as a call to action. Like, we have this year and only this year. At the end of this year, probably we'll have a California bill that gets implemented effective January 1st. We'll have the Colorado bill that gets implemented in February next year, and then it's off to the races. And the states will be so far ahead that it'll be very difficult for us to be able to rein them back in. And by the way, I do think that states have a role to play in the regulation of AI. Our system of federalism is complex, but it's one that served us very well. We have a whole chapter in our task force report, if you really want some bedside reading material, on the topic of preemption, because it turns out to be very complicated. But what I think Congress needs to do is establish some preemptive guardrails that make it clear to everybody what is preempted as interstate commerce regulation and reserved only for Congress. And then outside of those guardrails, where the states are free to be the laboratories of democracy that they are and always have been. And I think it's going to be a partnership, but I think we need to get our job done in Congress. And so I'm hopeful that we will be able to get that done this year. So that is kind of the landscape of where things are with regulation of AI in Congress, but we've left some time here at the end. I'm happy to answer questions on anything we've talked about, or as I said, anything that's going on with Medicaid and HR1, anything you'd like to discuss. What can I answer for you?
I'm thrilled at your forward thinking. I am very bullish, and I think you're approaching us the right way. I'm wondering if your task, the AI task force, or some other task force, is also addressing the need to assure that there's access to data. What I've seen is a disturbing trend. As you know, AI only functions as effectively as the corpus of data on which it can not only train initially, but update and continually relearn. And I've seen an interesting trend over the last several years where there's been almost a sort of a privatization of data and a fracturing of the data. And I think that that is an area that's potentially not being addressed as strongly as your initiatives on AI. Do you have any thoughts, or is that something that you're thinking about, or will there be another task force on that?
No, that's a great question. And this is something that we have discovered to our misfortune about AI. It's garbage in, garbage out, right? It very much matters what you train, the data that you use to train the algorithms when you measure the efficacy of the algorithms that they create. And this is particularly true in the healthcare space for two reasons. First of all, we have long recognized that healthcare data is kind of in its own category. That's why we have HIPAA, right? It's its own category as something that is particularly sensitive and personal, right? So we protect it in a very deliberate way. But also, uh, the problems have surfaced when the use of data to train algorithms to make healthcare decisions is restricted. And so, in particular, there have been studies that look at algorithms that lacked efficacy for certain, for example, racial populations. And what it comes down to is if you have differences in the way that, for example, people metabolize a drug or diseases present in different populations, you need to make sure you have data from those populations to train those algorithms, or the algorithms are not going to capture those differences. And yet, when you tunnel down to why that data is not included, there are other statistical phenomenon that prevent that data from being offered up in the use of the training corpus. So this is really troubling, right? And there's no good solution to this problem other than raising awareness of it. We are actually fortunate, though, in one way, which is we have HIPAA. And that might shock you for me to say, like, we're fortunate that we have HIPAA, but, at least that is one area of personal data that we have a federal standard for. Uh, that we're in even worse trouble in areas where we don't have a federal standard because then you have a much wider disparity in the data that's available to you from different populations and different demographics, different geographies, and it really creates problems in the algorithms that you create. So that's one of the reasons why I believe, and that it's in the task force report, that part of our job as federal regulators in setting up a regulatory framework for AI includes finishing the job of setting up a unified federal standard for data privacy. Because here's the problem. I mean, you think about this: uh, if you have a population of people that so say people are fully empowered to say, you can use my health data to train your algorithm. I mean, say you're training. Let's come up with a concrete example. How about we're going to train an algorithm for the automated screening of MRIs to detect, I don't know, colon cancer. Okay. And what do you need to be able to do that training? Well, you need a bunch of examples of MRIs. I mean, hopefully anonymized, right? A bunch that don't have colon cancer tumors and a bunch that do. And that way you can train an algorithm to differentiate between the two of those. If you fully empower people and you say, you get to decide, you let us know, can we use your MRI after it's been anonymized to help train our algorithm? And you allow some people to say, yes, you can, and some people to say, no, you can't. And then you just train the algorithm with the data of the people that said, yes, you can. As a scientist, you have to ask yourself the question, statistically, what do the people that said no have in common, right? Because that could introduce a bias into the algorithm. Because the answer, as a scientist, is almost never nothing. There's always something that they have in common that motivated them to say, no, you can't use my data. And this is the problem that you're highlighting, right? So I think that it's good that we're aware of it, right? We didn't 5 years ago. This phenomenon was a lot less well understood. Uh, but what we really need is a federal data privacy standard that kind of unifies that playing field. And then another thing that we're going to need to do, and we have a whole chapter in the task force report on this, is we need to solve some of the intellectual property issues surrounding AI. And of all of the things that are going to be hurdles for us to be able to do our jobs as regulators, those are going to be the thorniest, solving those intellectual property issues. I mean, what am I talking about? I'm talking about issues like, can you use copyrighted material for the training of commercial AI algorithms without the permission of the copyright holder? If you do that, have you created a derivative work in your algorithm that you've trained? If you have created derivative work, if it's generative AI and it creates something, is that a derivative work of the original intellectual property it was trained on? And if it is, who's the author of that? Can you copyright the output of generative AI if it's been trained on other copyrighted material? The biggest problem with this is you cannot answer those questions without creating winners and losers. So you've got the developers on one side and all of the intellectual property rights holders on the other, and they are already at war on these issues. So we have a number of court cases winding their way through the courts. The New York Times lawsuit one is probably going to be the most interesting, in my opinion, and we should get a ruling on that, I think, this year. And we will have to see if the courts can stretch this doctrine of fair use enough to cover these use cases. But I think that it will be necessary for Congress to step in at some point, because the last thing that we want to do is to force judges into the role as lawmakers, right? So if there's not enough of a body of law for them to rule on interpreting written law, and they're forced to create new law on what they think is fair, that's not a healthy situation for us. So we're going to have to roll in on that too. But great issues. Thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Congressman, for sharing your thoughts today. Rajesh Razdan from Kadaxo. My question is just a little extension of the question that was asked. As we all know, all these models and algorithms, they need data, but this data is also heavily regulated. And by that fact, only certain size of companies have easier access to this data. So in terms of fostering innovation and making sure there's a level playing field for even smaller businesses to have access to medical data in a regulatory manner, is there anything that your task force has suggested, or any thinking around that, making sure that this data is sort of access to data is democratized so that you have a level playing field as opposed to just the bigger companies having access to this data for creating new innovative products?
Yeah, no, that's an issue that we considered and very much share your concern about. On the one hand, we believe in entrepreneurialism in this country, and we don't believe on putting the thumb of government on the scale of commerce, right? So we don't think that we ought to make rules that say all the same data has to be available to everyone. But on the other hand, we need to make sure that the precursors of AI are available to people so that they can innovate and create and become entrepreneurs. And so how do you reconcile those two? What we think is we need something that we call NARE, the National AI Research Resource. And what that would do is create a pool of not only data, but also compute, those are the two precursors to the creation of AI algorithms. Compute, the situation is equally dire because everyone wants it. There aren't enough chips to go around. If you want a new H100 chip from NVIDIA, good luck to you. That's the big customers with the commercial power that are getting those chips for their data centers. If you're an entrepreneur trying to start up a new company and you want to compute to train on, it's very difficult to get. And we look at that and we think, similarly to the access to data, that's not healthy for us as an economy. So we would like to create a research resource that's available to academics and entrepreneurs that gives them access to pools of data and compute that they wouldn't ordinarily have access to allow them to innovate. And that's going to do something else that is another problem that we are concerned about and that we talk about in the report. We are concerned that the cutting edge research in artificial intelligence has shifted from an academic setting, which is where it was when I was working on my doctorate in AI, to a commercial setting, because only large companies can afford the data and the compute that goes into the creation of frontier artificial intelligence algorithms. It's becoming increasingly difficult to have access to those in an academic setting. And the problem with that is that we risk having that research being shifted to being behind closed doors, which would give up this rich tradition of academic research that we have in the United States. And this is something I'm particularly passionate about because I'm also the chairman of the Research and Technology Subcommittee on Science, Space, and Technology. So we have oversight over all of the nation's research budget. And we want to make sure that all of the things that come along with academic research continue to perpetuate in the United States. I'm talking about things like publication, peer review. Those are very important, and we lose those things if AI research gets done behind closed doors. So I have a bill that does that. It's called the Create AI Act. We were hopeful that we were going to get it across the finish line last year. We didn't quite get there, but we've got a bunch of bipartisan co-sponsors, and we're hoping that gets done this year. And just to make the point, I mean, some of the difficulty that I have on my own side of the aisle with that bill is this perception that the government is going to buy data and compute and give it away to people. And what we have found actually is that we don't need to do that. All of the top AI companies completely agree with us, and they want research to continue to be done in academic settings as well. And so they are willing to donate to the pool the extra compute that they're not using and data that they would like people to have access to. So this is something that the federal government would just be kind of the gatekeeper and manage access to those resources. And I think it'd be a very healthy thing for us. So that's how we propose to solve that problem.
That's great news.
Thank you for your comments. We've long known that there can be a lot of address, particularly around waste in government healthcare, if government healthcare could act similar to private healthcare, especially as it relates to program integrity and payment integrity. How do you see the bill headed into the Senate and also the efforts of DOGE evolving to be able to address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is something that really makes me cynical about our current system of government is when I look at all the mis and disinformation that has been flying around from both sides. I'm not singling out a single political party, but both parties have figured out how to use the tools of social media to weaponize outrage and anger by feeding out and usually it's not disinformation, it's misinformation. It's things that are taken out of context and stimulate that worry and fear in people and use that for their own political ends. But the problem is that neither party thinks beyond the next election. And once we're elected, we have to govern. So DOGE is a particularly poignant example of that because the claims on both sides are not true. Like there's the $2 trillion of savings. No, that has not materialized. We're going to consider a rescission package of probably less than $200 billion next week in the House, which is great that they found that, but it's not going to be $2 trillion. But on the other hand, this is not changing yanking away people's health care. I got a call this morning from a veteran in my district that very worried about the VA and the staff cuts. And when I explained to him, no, DOGE is trying to take the middlemen out of the VA. They've looked at the structure and they've said it's very unhealthy to have all of this middle management when what we want is boots on the ground. We want the people that actually want to empower the providers, and we want people providing care to our veterans. And so they're shifting those manpower and those resources down to service, out of these centers that were in the middle. And when I explain that, then they say, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Not only can we save money, but we can increase the quality of healthcare that we're providing to veterans. So, I mean, this is the problem of what's happening here. And unfortunately, we say waste, fraud, and abuse. Sometimes we're a little too broad, when we talk about that. Like, what is waste? It's really in the eye of the beholder. And if you want an example of that, look at the current debate over Medicaid and the community engagement requirements. You can argue both sides of that issue on what's waste. But I really wish that we as Americans could view ourselves more as playing for Team America. I wish that we in the House could do that. I wish that, we, rather than thinking of ourselves as a member of Team Republican or Team Democrat, that we could think of ourselves as a member of Team America and, that we're all there for the same reasons. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. All right, what else can I answer for you?
I had a quick question about, I think your Luddite story is a good one. But as you see these things creep into like clinical decisions being made and how like the AMA and other groups may respond to that, what are your thoughts on how you see that evolving when it comes to AI making, medical decisions or decisions of consequence that you're kind of speaking to?
Sure. No, great question. You know what? I'm remiss. I should have kept my audience in mind and actually touched on that one in my talk, and I'm glad you brought it up. Um, we have had intense discussions with all of those groups, including the AMA. And what I tell them is, I believe that AI will create many more jobs for doctors. Many more jobs for doctors. I don't think AI will ever be a tool that we trust enough to replace having a physician in the loop. But the doctors are going to be much better equipped. They're going to be equipped with things that increase their knowledge. They're going to be equipped with things that increase their productivity. And because of that, the cost of healthcare should be driven down to the point where more people can get the care that they need. And so even though doctors are more productive, that will mean we need a lot more doctors. And we're already seeing this with radiologists, right? They were really the first group that feared being disrupted. They said, hey, these algorithms for automated screenings of diagnostic tests are going to put us out of work. And as it turns out, no, it doesn't put you out of work, because if the cost of the test is lower, then more people will get them done. In fact, many more people will get them done. And if many more people get them done, even if you're automated the screening of 75% of them, the 25% that are problematic, that fittingly or get referred to being reviewed by a human, that's going to require more jobs for radiologists. So I think that there is no space in our economy that is going to be more impacted by the advent of AI than healthcare. But I think those impacts will be positive. And I really hope that we are going to be able to use AI to solve what I think the number one problem with healthcare is in the United States. And it'd be interesting to see if the room agrees with me on this. But I look at this strange dichotomy that we have here in America, where on the one hand, I think we have the best providers on the planet. But on the other hand, we have the highest cost for providing healthcare on the planet in ways that make no sense. I mean, we spend twice as much per capita as countries like the UK that have socialized medicine systems. We spend 3 times as much per capita, not in dollars, like dollars per patient, as countries like Singapore that actually have better healthcare outcomes on average. So I think that AI is going to help us solve that dichotomy. I think we're well positioned with the network of providers that we have to be able to drive the cost of healthcare down to the point where we can broaden the population that actually can get the healthcare that they need. And I think that that's going to dramatically increase healthcare outcomes and longevity in the United States. So that's one of the bullish stories about AI that I tell when I'm talking about the positive impacts on our country.
Hi, I'm going to challenge you with a legal question just because I thought it'd be a fun way to end your presentation. I loved that you're just the very beginning when you said we don't need to have it be a crime to steal using AI because we already have crimes to steal. But any thoughts going on about some sort of enhancement when the crime does use AI, kind of like we've got wire fraud and mail fraud and these other, enhancements, if you will. There are other federal charges that prosecutors can bring. I just was curious on that.
Sure, I have thoughts about that. In general, I'm not a fan of that kind of enhancement because, as I said, I think that the punishment should fit the crime, and the crime is based on the outcome. And if you're trying to steal someone's money, I don't think it matters if you're using AI to do it. There are already enhancements that say, somewhat controversially, if I use a gun to steal your money, that's a violent crime. But if I use technology to steal your money, that's a nonviolent crime. I think that's kind of splitting hairs. The outcome is, I think, what we should focus on, in general on that. However, there are limited exceptions. And there are some unique problems that AI has caused that do require specific solutions that are based on the employment of AI. And I'll give you a recent example, which I hope will give people some confidence that Congress is actually capable of acting on this. So we just passed, in fact, I attended the bill signing ceremony at the White House, God, seems like a month ago, but I guess it was last week, for a bill that prohibits the use of AI for what we call non-consensual intimate imagery. So we've got this problem where young people across the country are having classmates use AI to superimpose their face on a pornographic body. And generative AI can do that in a way that's fairly convincing. And then you have these young people victimized when this material is spread around. And I think we should all be able to agree that that is not okay. And so we passed a bill that prevents those. We call them deep fakes, prevents those and makes it illegal, not just to create them, but also to distribute them. So it creates a mechanism where someone can say, hey, look, there's a video that's purportedly of me circulating. That is not me. Please take it down. And it has to be taken down. In fact, we call it the Take It Down Act. And President Trump signed that last week. So that's an example of an occasion where I think it is appropriate to say this is a unique problem that AI is causing. But again, when we wrote that legislation, we did not say that you have to have used AI to do that, right? We focus on the outcome. We say, if you have created something that is deceptive, that was done without the consent of the person and, using images that's just not germane, that is in a category of non-consensual intimate imagery that we're going to make illegal. So, I think that's kind of the way I parse that problem. That's a great question. Well, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity here. Please reach out to me if I can ever be of service to you. You've got my name there. Just put me into Google. Doesn't even matter if you misspell it. You'll get taken to my capital office or my district office and love to help you. But I want to say before we go, thank you very much for the work that you're doing. I mean, I told you about my passion for using AI to make the delivery of healthcare more efficient and effective in the United States. And you are on the front line of that effort. And so I just wanted to say thank you for being here to figure out how we can use collectively AI together to make that dream come true. Thanks, everyone.